Okay, getting to the story at hand. So, based on my analysis and the sources and OSINT, here's what I think just happened. All right, you may not agree with this analysis, and that's fine, and I can't prove it. My confidence level of this analysis is not even 90%, but let's say I think it's more likely than not that this is what happened. Okay, so we'll say 51% or more chance that this is what happened. I think that Prigozhin, who was the head of Wagner, the Wagner Group, or Wagner, depending on how you want to say it, which of course was a private military contractor group in Russia, PMC Wagner. Prigozhin, I think, just got paid $6+ billion by the West. Now, and that payment was for him to pull what he just pulled, to declare an attack against the Russian government and to start sending his troops towards Moscow. And they made it almost there. I mean, they were only 200 kilometers away. They took over the city of Rostov, or not the city, I should say, some government buildings, military buildings in Rostov, and then they left there, and some of the troops were heading towards Moscow. And remember last week when the U.S. State Department spokesperson announced that, oh, we had a miscalculation. Turns out there's another 6.4 billion, I think it was, that we're supposed to send to Ukraine. Yeah, I think that was a cover story for the money going to Prigozhin. Now, Prigozhin is already a billionaire, by the way. He's a very successful business person. And his background is not military, even though he runs the Wagner, or he did run the Wagner PMC group. But he's a very successful business person, and he knows the value of money. And so I believe he got paid $6 billion plus, and was told that on this particular day, you're supposed to take all your forces and basically charge on, rush Moscow and call for essentially overthrowing the government. All right? So he did. He did do that. Now, of course, this effort failed. We'll get to that. But he was supposed to do this in conjunction with several other things that were taking place at the same time. And here they are. Number one, the Ukrainian counteroffensive was supposed to be launching major and effective attacks at the same time to break through Russia's defensive lines in the Donbass region. Secondly, the NATO air exercise that just completed a few days ago was supposed to overlap this so-called uprising against Moscow. And again, this uprising was carried out by the CIA and the State Department, just like they planned an uprising in the United States to overthrow Trump, and they stole the White House. All right, this is a color revolution type of thing that they were planning for Moscow. But the air exercise was supposed to overlap this so that the air exercise could go live, and NATO fighter jets and cargo planes and other military planes, AWACS and so on, could be just transitioned over into attack mode against Russia as this whole thing went live. The third thing that was supposed to happen, and this information comes from Scott Ritter, who recently returned from Russia, is that there were Antifa-like domestic terror groups that were hired, paid by Ukraine, i.e. the United States, to carry out acts of terrorism and bombings and burning things down, basically attacks on the infrastructure around Moscow, in order to create fear and confusion and instability at the same time that all these other things were going on. So this was all part of the propaganda war against Russia and the attempt to make Putin look so weak that he could be overthrown. So in combination, what this was all supposed to be together was, again, in summary, Ukraine breaking through Russia's defensive lines, making Russia's military look weak and ineffective. Prigozhin marching on Moscow to overthrow Putin, overthrow the government, and seize control over the country, which was always an insane idea, by the way. I'll explain why. Antifa-style terrorist groups in Moscow, basically well-armed, well-funded opposition groups setting fire to buildings, setting off bombs across Moscow, creating instability, and the air exercise fighter jets from NATO and bombers and so on attacking Russian targets at the same time. This was all supposed to happen on the same day. It did not happen on the same day because it's incredibly difficult to coordinate such events, by the way. So the Ukrainian counteroffensive attacks against the Russian defensive lines have mostly failed. There have been some successes in certain areas, but by and large, they have not gained hardly any ground and they have not been effective. The air exercise, the NATO air exercise, ended a few days ago without it going live. Again, because of a timing problem. The terror cells in Moscow never activated because they were waiting for Prigozhin to arrive. And he only got to 200 miles or kilometers, from Moscow. And the Prigozhin attack failed because, well, how could it possibly succeed? You see, the Wagner group was only effective in Bakhmut or other operations because it had a continuous supply of ammo and fuel and artillery rounds from the Russian government, the Ministry of Defense, Shoigu and others. And this is why Prigozhin and Shoigu have been at each other's throats for over a year now, because Prigozhin has always said, Shoigu is withholding ammunition from us and he's a traitor. And that was part of what he was screaming about the last few days. But the point is, without ammunition and fuel, no private military contractor group has any effectiveness whatsoever. I mean, if you rely on just what you have, like the fuel in your fuel tanks and the ammo in your rifles, or the shells that you could carry with you, you're done in a couple of days. You have to have constant resupply, and not just those two things. I mean, you have to have hydraulic fluid and diesel engine oil and, maintenance and also things for your soldiers, first aid and clothing and water and food and all these things. Without those supplies, you have nothing. And so the whole idea that Wagner could take over the Russian government was silly from the very beginning. It was an insane idea. But it's clear that Prigozhin, who is definitely an intelligent person, although he's probably crazy. I mean, he's surely crazy. But he's a high IQ crazy person, right? He must have known that this was impossible. But he took the probably $6 billion, that's my guess, I can't prove it, but I think he took $6 billion to do this, knowing that it would not succeed and knowing that it was only a short-term deal and he would be able to negotiate his way out of it, which is exactly what he did. So he negotiated, thanks to the president of Belarus, who negotiated this settlement between Prigozhin and Putin in record time. And this negotiated settlement is reportedly going to grant total legal immunity to Prigozhin. So even though he carried out what I think any honest observer would describe as treason or an attempted armed revolution, armed overthrow of the Russian government, that's what he was actually bragging about, he's going to face no criminal charges whatsoever. Now remember, if you get caught with CBD oil in Russia, you might go to a prison for years and end up in a Russian work camp. But apparently, if you commit treason against the Russian government, you get off scot-free. Well, how was he able to negotiate that? Because he claimed to have 25,000 men with him and enough equipment and vehicles to embarrass Putin, to embarrass Russia by causing a civil war, causing Russians to shoot other Russians, which... And there was apparently maybe a couple of helicopters, maybe an airplane that was shot down by the Wagner group. So there were some pilots that died. But there ended up being no soldier-on-soldier battles on the ground and no tank battles, nothing like that. There was no crazy bloodshed that happened, fortunately for them. But had there been, it would have made Putin look incredibly weak. It would have embarrassed Russia and probably would have made Russia's allies think that, oh my gosh, Russia's about to collapse and fall, while emboldening Russia's enemies, which are, of course, Ukraine and NATO and the United States and so on, and Western Europe. And over the last 24 hours, by the way, the Western press was already talking about, this is the fall of Russia. The Putin regime is imploding. It's done. And so many people were thinking, this is great news, finally. Russia's imploding. It's over. They're going to surrender in no time, which, by the way, isn't going to happen. It didn't really change anything in the Donbass region, by the way. This didn't even affect the Russian military on the front lines, who are still doing their jobs and still defending the areas that they've claimed, including the city of Bakhmut, by the way. So nothing really changed on the front lines. But the Western media was drooling over this possibility. Oh, this is so awesome. There's instability in Russia. And they were rooting for the Wagner Group, the people who have hated Prigozhin and who have hated the Wagner Group for the last year plus. They were now rooting for Wagner. I mean, it's crazy. You have all these pro-Ukrainian people that suddenly became pro-Wagner people. Like, Prigozhin's our guy. I mean, now that he's sufficiently insane, a bunch of Ukrainian cheerleaders were like, yeah, he's awesome. He's on our team now because he's totally freaking crazy. It's like, he's one of us. I mean, how crazy is that, right? I mean, the guy trying to commit treason. What were these Western people thinking? That if Prigozhin took over Moscow, that, he would be more reasonable to deal with than Putin somehow? Because that's an insane idea. That's not going to happen. I mean, Putin is a level-headed guy, actually. Putin, regardless of what you think of him, he's high IQ, and he actually is rather methodical in his responses, his reactions. I mean, you notice he didn't overreact against the Wagner Group. He didn't order a military assault, like, destroy the convoy on the highway. No, he could have. He could have completely destroyed Prigozhin, killed him, wiped out whatever 5,000 men who were with him or whatever the number was, destroyed all the vehicles. Yeah, Putin could have ordered that. He did not. Wonder why? Because that would have created the impression of instability. Russian on Russian blood spilling in the streets of Russia. What would that do to Russia's reputation internationally, you see? So he remained rather cool-headed, Putin did, and he negotiated with Prigozhin. And he gave Prigozhin a pretty darn good deal. Again, no criminal charges, but you are exiled from Russia. So Prigozhin's going to go, I guess, retire in Belarus, or at least for a while. And the Wagner Group appears to be, it looks like it's going to be disbanded and then probably reabsorbed into the Russian military, which is exactly what I said yesterday was going to happen. You can go back to my podcast yesterday. I said this thing won't last very long. I think I said maybe a couple of days. And then when it's over, the Wagner soldiers are probably going to be split up and distributed and implemented into the Russian military in a distributed fashion. So the Wagner Group will be no more. Now it's pretty clear that's exactly what's going to happen. Now, Russian Minister of Defense, Shoigu, reportedly, he is being fired in this. So I guess Putin also kind of gave in to Prigozhin's demand to take out Shoigu, at least professionally, so that Shoigu's not in charge. That's interesting to me. You know why? Because Putin and Shoigu don't see eye to eye on everything either. At least that's my understanding. It's almost like the St. Petersburg versus Moscow kind of rivalry there. And Shoigu could have been a long-term threat to Putin's power. But with Shoigu at least reportedly stepping down from his position, you know what this whole thing actually accomplished? It made Putin stronger. This rallied the Russian people behind Putin even more than at any time before. And it destroyed the reputation of Prigozhin among the Russian people, because Prigozhin is now seen as a traitor. And those who had previously supported Prigozhin and his complaints about the Russian government, now most of those people have gone in with supporting the Russian government because Prigozhin just looks like a crazy traitor at this point. So, in effect, this whole thing, which was theater, that is theater that was funded and orchestrated by the West, by the way, right? CIA operation and attempted overthrow. But Putin, being the grand master of the chessboard that he is, he figured out a way for him to actually gain more power as this whole attempted revolution fell apart. How wild is that? I mean, Putin comes out of this with more power. The revolution fails. Putin's able to announce more security measures against traitors or, quote, insurrectionists, things like that. And Putin was able to get more of the Russian people to support him, even people who used to be more critical of him. So now Putin is in the most powerful, most popular position that he's been in probably since he took office. Think about that. The uprising failed. It was over in a day, showing that, in fact, virtually all the support in the country lined up behind Putin, not Prigozhin. And now the Russian military can turn its attention back to Ukraine and the Donbass region. In fact, the Wagner units turned around and they went back, at least most of them, I think, went back to the Donbass region where they had come from a couple days earlier. And they're going to be required, by the way, those contractors will be required to sign contracts with the Russian Ministry of Defense, essentially making them official soldiers under the control of Putin. So Putin won everything in this. Putin gained control of the Wagner group. Putin got Prigozhin exiled from the country and out of the way so that he can't keep causing trouble. Putin got Shoigu essentially fired from his position so that Shoigu can't threaten Putin in the future. And Putin was able to rally the Russian people behind himself even more than before. And what was the price that Putin paid for this? 24 hours of uncertainty? And a couple of blown up helicopters and some destroyed roads that were dug up by backhoes to try to stop the advance. And that's pretty much it. In other words, Putin's a freaking genius. I mean, he won big. He won everything in this exchange. And the CIA lost. The U.S. State Department lost. The revolution failed. Their uprising failed. I mean, the attempted overthrow of Putin utterly failed, and it was ridiculous. And they just blew probably $6 billion or whatever they ended up paying Prigozhin. Maybe it was only $1 billion. I don't know. But since he's already a billionaire, they probably had to pay him more than just another $1 billion. They probably had to pay him a lot. Multiple billions. So Prigozhin's now going to be sitting in Belarus commanding multiple billions of dollar equivalents, although he's probably not holding it in dollars because he's not an idiot. He knows the dollar is going to zero. But Prigozhin's probably sitting there like, wow, I have legal immunity and I have got billions of dollars, and he's now free to do almost anything he wants other than, he can't go back to Russia right now. He can probably buy his way back in later if he wants to return. And he can't lead another private military contractor group, but I'm sure he's done with that anyway. So you see why this analysis actually makes sense? It's almost as if, and you can decide whether you think this is true or not, but it's almost as if Putin knew about all this and that Putin and Prigozhin were acting out together in this theater while collecting billions of dollars from the West and making Putin even more popular. I would not be surprised if Putin and Prigozhin were working together. You notice that in Putin's speech, by the way, that he gave, 36 hours ago, whatever it was, he never mentioned Prigozhin. He said, yeah, there were traitors. He said there were, I think he mentioned the Wagner group, but he never mentioned Prigozhin. You notice that? If you read the transcript in English, Prigozhin's never mentioned. Putin never said that he's going to kill Prigozhin and never tried to. Yeah, the Russian government issued an arrest warrant for him, but then in the final negotiations, Prigozhin was given total legal immunity, and guess who guaranteed that legal immunity and safe passage to Belarus? Guess who guaranteed it? Vladimir Putin. That's right, a presidential guarantee of safe passage and non-prosecution for everything. Folks, what you just watched, I believe, this is my analysis, I think you just watched Russian theater that just milked billions of dollars out of the West while the West was thinking they were carrying out a revolution, a coup d'etat that was always doomed to fail from the start. But Putin let it happen for all the reasons that I'm now talking about, because Putin is now stronger than ever. And the West just, blew its last opportunity. Because regime change in Russia was the last chance for the West to achieve some kind of victory. Now that that has failed, here's what I think is going to happen next. I think that Ukraine's military is just about done. And I'm not condemning in any way the Ukrainian people. Brave men and women, courageous. I mean, it saddens me that anybody, but including those from Ukraine, are being harmed and killed in this unnecessary war. But you can't change the laws of physics. And Ukraine has just about run out of men. They've certainly almost run out of ammunition. And they just don't have the training and the equipment and the men, of course, that's needed to defeat Russia. The counterattack has failed almost everywhere. Counter-assault. So what this means, in my view, is that we're now looking at, since this attempted revolution failed, we're looking at a major transition into a NATO-run war against Russia. So over the next few days and weeks, I think what you're going to see is Ukraine stepping back and NATO stepping forward. And we're going to have NATO declarations of war against Russia at some point. I mean, the official declaration will come eventually, but even before that, NATO forces will be involved directly. So we're going to have a mad rush of NATO tanks and, F-16 aircraft and NATO troops, by the way, that are just going to flood into Ukraine and take over from where the Ukrainian soldiers have not been able to break through Russia's defensive lines and take back territory, including Crimea. This is what I think is going to happen. But understand that NATO will need a cover story. They have to have an excuse. Oh, why did we have to rush in there? What was so important? And for that, we can expect that there's going to be some kind of attempt to probably fake a nuclear event. It could be the Zaporizhia nuclear power plant, staged accident or something. It could be a nuclear false flag, nuclear terrorism, dirty bomb. There could be some kind of nuclear event that would be the easiest cover story to justify NATO going in, and you would see the State Department and Joe Biden claiming, well, now we have to, for the sake of humanity, to save the world. Look, Russia's using nuclear artillery, nuclear terrorism. If we don't go in, humanity's done. Which is interesting because that's the argument from some influencers in Russia. I forgot the professor's name, but he's a very powerful influencer. I'm sorry, I can't remember all the Russian names very well. But this professor argued that Russia should engage in limited nuclear strikes, he said, against Western targets to save humanity from total nuclear war. His argument is that you have to get the West to back off so that things don't escalate. And the way to not escalate, in his mind, is to launch a few nukes and hope that NATO doesn't respond. I'm not sure that that's sound logic, by the way, and I hope that that's not something that Putin is considering doing, but you never know. Because I think once nukes start to fly, then more nukes fly in retaliation, and then you end up in a rapidly escalating nuclear annihilation scenario where everybody dies. Eventually, even those of us in North America. So let's hope it doesn't go to that, but it could. It absolutely could. So we've just escaped one kind of danger, which was the revolution danger that failed. But now we've entered another kind of danger, which is that NATO's revolution failed, and therefore NATO is going to go to their next plan of escalation, which potentially involves some kind of nuclear false flag. That's my guess of where this is going next. Now, that means we're not really out of danger, obviously. It's just that the danger is shifting to a different strategy. It still is the danger of a nuclear exchange. And we're not out of the woods yet, not by a long shot. As long as there is war in Ukraine, we're not out of the woods. None of us are. We need peace in Ukraine. But that's only going to happen if somebody sits down and negotiates with Putin, which Zelensky refuses to do and NATO refuses to do, apparently. Nobody wants to negotiate unless Russia gives up all the territory that it currently holds, which is Donbass region and Crimea. And I don't think Russia has any interest in giving up all that territory. So we seem to be at an impasse, and Zelensky's crazy, and the U.S. State Department's insane, and Joe Biden has dementia, and we're being led into World War III by a bunch of lunatics and morons, just crazy idiots, basically. And the one guy who stands out in all of this as not overreacting is Vladimir Putin, if you can believe that. How funny is that? I mean, maybe not funny, but kind of sad that is, right? If Trump were president, he'd be negotiating with Putin, and this war would have been over. And there'd be far fewer people dying. Even if Ronald Reagan were involved in such a situation, he'd be negotiating, or frankly, JFK, he would have been negotiating. But because the United States is run by, Russia-hating, ethnic cleansing, depopulation, globalist-oriented lunatics, we're not going to get peace anytime soon. We're only going to get different ways for them to escalate to war. That is the major concern of where we are right now. And how many more cards does the State Department have up its sleeve at this point? What about the CIA? What else do they have? Because they've tried a lot of things, and everything's failed so far. I mean, they tried the economic sanctions. That was the State Department getting the SWIFT system, to deplatform Russia. That happened in, March of 2022. And they thought, that would bring Russia to its knees. The ruble would collapse. Russia would have no functioning economy. And then they would eventually have to surrender or whatever. Instead, Russia just got stronger and became more resilient and built its supply chain to rely on more domestic resources and strong international allies that would engage in trade with Russia, which includes India, by the way, and Turkey and Belarus and a bunch of other countries like Iran that's manufacturing the battle drones that Russia is using quite effectively on the battlefield. So all these plans that the West has attempted to roll out against Russia, including this Prigozhin payoff revolution coup attempt, they've all failed. They've all failed. And Russia continues to stand strong against the entire Western alliance, I guess. The liberal world order, which is pushing transgenderism and child mutilations all over the world, by the way. But Russia is standing strong against that. Even though it's a total propaganda war, it's an information war, it's a kinetic war, it's a financial war, it's a culture war, all of that. And it's a cyber war. Every form of warfare that you can imagine is being waged right now. And Russia still has not been destroyed, and everything the West tries keeps failing. So what do you think they're going to try next? It's going to be increasingly desperate, that's for sure. And do not forget the Hillary Clinton plan. If Hillary Clinton became president in 2016, you remember what the plan was with her as president? It was to set off a nuclear bomb in a U.S. city using nuclear material that was sourced from Russia through the Uranium One scandal, and then to blame Russia for nuking an American city and use that to rally the American people to support a retaliatory nuclear strike on Russia and try to destroy Russia. Hillary Clinton was supposed to be the president to oversee the total destruction of Russia. Well, the election of Trump destroyed that plan. So what did the State Department do, and the CIA and the FBI? Well, they immediately had to make up this fake dossier and all these fake crimes and claim that Trump was backed by Russia, of course. So that became the narrative for 5+ years. I guess that's still going, even though it's all false, total fiction. But they pushed that narrative the entire time because it's always been about blaming Russia, and Trump interfered with their plans to destroy Russia. And also Trump was more about free trade. Trump would even talk to Kim Jong-un? Is that the current Kim Jong in North Korea? I don't know if it's un or ill or suck or da or what. I have no idea. But whatever Kim Jong is currently in power in North Korea, Trump is willing to talk to him. Trump will talk to anybody, and he'll talk them out of war. And he'll talk them into like an economic win-win benefit. Like, hey, what if you built a bunch of hotels? What if you had tourism? What if you had more exports? You'd be rich. I mean, why do you want war when you could be a billionaire, right? That kind of thing. And Trump's not wrong about that. When nations trade, more people become more wealthy. When nations go to war, then people suffer and die and everything sucks and economies collapse. And which world would you rather live in? A world where we trade with Russia or where we trade nukes with Russia? You see, Trump would have us trading goods and services and money. Biden and Victoria Nuland and these other lunatics, Blinken and so on, will have us trading nukes where everybody dies. And this is why stolen elections have catastrophic consequences, because having Joe Biden in power is absolutely catastrophic for humanity. And it's only by the steady hand of Putin right now, by the way, that we aren't already in a nuclear war. It's Putin that, even though he has been subjected to numerous provocations and numerous even false flag attempts surrounding the Zaporizhia nuclear power plant already, and Putin blamed for destroying that dam in Ukraine and so on, Putin has held back. He has not launched nukes. He has not yet declared war against the West. He has not bombed Western military bases, not yet, even though Medvedev is openly talking about that almost every day. Medvedev is like the nuclear cheerleader, like nuke Warsaw, nuke London, come on. That's Medvedev. He's the nuclear bad cop, while Putin is the nuclear good cop, who's like the more reasonable cop. Who's like, nah, we're not going to launch nukes, not unless we absolutely have to. So we are in, again, one of the most fascinating and dangerous scenarios that we've ever lived through. And, frankly, the only reason we're not in nuclear war right now is because Putin refuses to have his mind hijacked and exploited and dragged into that scenario. But the West is doing everything they can to cause Putin to launch nukes. And it makes you wonder what they have up their sleeve next. They have something. They're not going to just give up. They're going to escalate in some crazy way. So just be ready for every bizarre possibility that you can think of. Now, we thank you for all your support. And if you want to continue to support us, and if you want to get yourself some backup supplies, for whatever reason, we've been selling a ton of certified organic lab tested storable food over the last couple of days. HealthRangerStore.com.